I'll show you my vault. And if your bank...
So let's see here.
Oh, she takes so long to read her shorthand. Well, come on, Mooney.
Imagine finding a vault that's been locked for 50 years. Not just any vault, but one that...
Your slogan, can't you remember it? Oh, yes, sir. I can... No, it's coming back to me now.
Are audio recordings with a label that says, "Do not open." When researchers finally...
We must be a good bank. Your baker puts his dough here.
Everything he built. This is the story of Jack Benny's real vault, and what they...
Your baker puts his dough here? Well, that isn't all of it.
For decades, Jack Benny entertained America with jokes about his pretend vault. On his...
Sir, the entire slogan goes, your baker puts his dough here, so he has it when he...
Guard who had been locked inside since the Civil War. Millions of...
Needs it. Don't you get it, sir? Baker, dough.
Had a real vault, too. And the secrets inside stayed hidden until long after he was gone.
Dough, needs... You've got to be kidding.
Because the man America loved wasn't exactly who he appeared to be. He was born with a...
May I say something, sir?
No. Yes. Certainly.
Well, sir...
Benjamin Kubelsky, but she had big plans for him even before he was born.
I don't think a slogan is enough to bring in new business. What our bank needs is an advertising gimmick. You know...
Chicago just to give birth there. Why would she do that? Because she wanted her son's birth certificate to say he was born in a big city. She believed that would help him become a world-famous violinist someday. His mother Emma was sick and weak in her body, but her mind was sharp and she was determined. She had already decided that her baby boy would grow up playing the violin in fancy concert halls. His father Meyer had a different story. He came from Poland and started selling things on the streets of Chicago. He worked hard and eventually owned a saloon. He didn't think much of show business and thought it was a terrible choice for a respectable Jewish family. But Emma was the one who made the decisions in that house. From the time Benjamin could hold anything, his mother was training him. When he was 3 years old, they moved back to Wisconsin and lived in a little house where Benjamin could see Lake Michigan from the window. That lake became a problem. His mother made him practice the violin for 2 hours every single day, but he kept staring out at the water instead. His father kept running his saloon and later opened a clothing store, while his mother kept pushing him to play music. When his little sister Florence was born in 1900, Benjamin became a protective big brother, but he still had to spend his days with the violin. On his 6th birthday, he got a smaller violin as a gift, and the lessons started right away. He had to pay a teacher 50 cents twice a week. And here's the thing, Benjamin was actually really good. People started calling him a child prodigy. He was even taken to Chicago to study with a famous teacher at a music college, but he absolutely hated practicing. His mother would sit at the piano and play along with him, saying over and over, "You can do it better." He would barely move his bow because he was so bored and frustrated. The people in his town believed in him so much that they raised money to send him to Europe to study music. Can you imagine how excited they must have been? But Benjamin shocked everyone by saying no. He turned down the offer. He was already starting to slip away from the path his mother had planned for him. At school, he was failing all his classes. He pulled pranks and skipped school constantly. The most famous prank happened in winter when he put stinky cheese behind the classroom heater. When it melted, the smell was so bad that the whole school had to shut down. He got kicked out during his first year of high school, and the principal said he could come back if he changed his ways, but he never did. By that time, Benjamin had already found a job playing violin in the orchestra pit at a local theater. While other kids his age were in school learning math and science, he was playing music for live shows. But the real education came from his father's saloon. That place was filled with traveling performers and loud, funny people. That's where he learned what made people laugh and what didn't. One night in 1911, something incredible almost happened. The Marx Brothers came to town, and their mother Minnie saw young Benjamin play. She offered him $7.50 a week plus a place to stay if he would tour with them. But his parents said absolutely not. They said it would corrupt him and ruin his life. That decision could have changed everything, but they refused. That same year, when he was 17 years old, Benjamin made a huge decision. He quit school for good and joined a traveling show with a 43-year-old widow named Cora Salisbury. She promised his parents that she would keep him safe from bad influences and wild girls who hung around stage doors. They traveled constantly, performing 4 shows every single day in dusty theaters all over the Midwest. Their act was called From Grand Opera to Ragtime, and Jack earned $7.50 a week. It wasn't much money, but it was the start of something. Then in 1912, disaster almost struck. A famous violinist named Jan Kubelik sent lawyers after him because their names were too similar. Benjamin was terrified that he would get sued, so he changed his stage name to Ben K. Benny. But that didn't solve the problem. A few years later, another performer named Ben Burney came after him too. That's when he finally became Jack Benny. The name Jack came partly from sailors calling each other Jack, and partly from having dinner with a comedian named Benny Rubin. By 1921, the name stuck, and he never changed it again. At age 23, Jack was drafted during World War I and sent to a naval training center. At first, he just played violin for ceremonies and events, but one night changed his entire life. During a talent show, he played a serious religious song, and the crowd started booing. A fellow sailor named Pat O'Brien yelled at him to tell a joke instead. Jack made one quick, funny remark, and the whole place exploded with laughter. That was the moment. That was when the comedian was born inside him. He started performing regularly in shows for the Navy, playing a clumsy character. He performed for crowds of up to 5,000 sailors. He discovered timing. He discovered charm. And he discovered that he could get more applause with a single joke than with an hour of beautiful music. After the war ended in 1918, he held on to that funny character. America was tired and broke and still dealing with food shortages, so Jack Benny leaned into a stingy, penny-pinching character that he had developed during his time in the Navy. He started a solo act that combined playing the violin with jokes about being cheap. He made fun of himself. He pulled fake money out of his coat. Audiences absolutely loved it. The timing couldn't have been better. People laughed because they understood what it felt like to have no money. He wasn't making fun of them. He was one of them. By the time Jack Benny made it to Broadway in 1924, he was already 30 years old and had been traveling and performing for over a decade. He wasn't new to performing, but this was different. This was his chance to do something bigger. He stood under bright lights holding his violin, but this time he wasn't trying to show off his skill. He deliberately played just a little bit badly, enough to make people laugh, even though he could actually play beautifully since he started at age 6. That combination of dry sarcasm, a little music, and a lot of confidence was something Broadway hadn't really seen before. The New York Times newspaper said it was fresh and different. 2 years later, in 1926, he took a risk in a show called The Great Temptations. It was bold and edgy, and even a little bit shocking. He played a wisecracking violinist again, but this time he started making up lines that weren't in the script. Scenes that were supposed to last 5 minutes went on for 15 minutes instead. Crowds loved it, but the producers were furious. They begged him to stick to the written script and keep the show on schedule, but Jack didn't care. His contract gave him creative control, and he used it. The arguments behind the scenes got so bad that the company threatened to replace him. But he didn't stop. He couldn't stop. And maybe that's when Broadway started to realize that Jack Benny wasn't like other performers. He wasn't just doing what he was told, he was changing the rules. That same year, something unexpected happened. Jack met a young woman named Sadie Marks. Technically, it wasn't their first meeting. Back around 1919 or 1920, when Jack was about 30 years old, he had been invited to a family dinner by one of the Marx brothers. A 14-year-old girl named Sadie was there, and she was completely starstruck. She played a violin piece for him, trying to impress him. But he didn't even stay to listen. He asked his friend to help him sneak out early. She heard him asking to leave, and the next night when he performed at a theater, she sat in the front row with her friends and stared straight ahead with no expression on her face. She didn't smile once. She didn't laugh once. She got her revenge. They didn't meet again until 1925 or 1926, when she was 20 years old and working at a department store in Los Angeles, selling women's underwear and stockings. Jack came in and bought so much women's hosiery that she set a store record for sales. Then he came back every single day. He called her constantly when he was traveling for shows. This wasn't some quick romance. It was awkward and slow and strange, but somehow it worked between them. In 1927, Jack Benny got a starring role in Artists and Models on Broadway. This was the peak of his stage career. He earned $1,500 a week, which would be about $25,000 in today's money. It wasn't just money, though. It was proof that he had made it. He had something special that people wanted to see. He would walk on stage, set up a beautiful classical music piece, then destroy it by playing the violin terribly on purpose. The audience would roar with laughter. He used long pauses, fake frustration, and perfectly timed sarcasm. The smart people in the crowd knew how skilled he actually was at playing, but he would rather get laughs than applause. He turned his own failure into an art form. But that same year, something unexpected happened. A theater manager accused him of not paying orchestra musicians what he owed them. Suddenly, rumors weren't about his jokes or his talent anymore, they were about money. The musicians' union got involved. There were threats that he would be banned from performing. Theater owners started canceling his shows. It was really bad. Jack had to pay settlements and apologize just to keep working. But the damage was done. People started whispering that Jack Benny was cheap, that he would cheat musicians just to save money. And years later, when he created the cheapskate character on his radio show, nobody forgot about this scandal. It wasn't just an act. It was based on something real that had happened. Still, not everything that year was a disaster. On January 14, 1927, Jack married Sadie at a hotel in Illinois. She was now going by the name Mary Livingston. During the wedding ceremony, when it came time for Jack to break the glass according to Jewish tradition, something unexpected happened. It wasn't Jack who fainted, it was Mary. She collapsed right there in front of everyone. But when she woke up, she found roses. Jack had already been sending her one red rose every single day. After the wedding, she thought the roses would stop. They didn't. He kept sending her one single red rose every single day until the day he died in 1974. That's 48 years. One rose every day for nearly half a century. In 1934, they adopted a 2-week-old baby girl and named her Joan. Jack looked at her and said something that sounds terrible, asking how anyone could want to adopt such a funny-looking baby. But they brought her home and loved her. By then, Mary had already convinced Jack to move into radio. Vaudeville was dying out. Traveling constantly was exhausting. Radio meant they could stay in one place and have a stable life. And she was absolutely right. They got rich from radio. Jack's big radio break came in 1932 with a show sponsored by Canada Dry. It started on May 2nd, and by the end of the week, 40 million people were listening. But it didn't work well at first. Jack was still trying to mix music and jokes together. He played his violin seriously, thinking it would impress listeners. It didn't. The ratings were low. Nobody cared about hearing him play beautifully. Then something clicked in his mind. He stopped trying to impress people. He made the violin playing bad on purpose. He let other people on the show make jokes about him. He made himself the punchline. And suddenly, the audience loved it. In 1933, he moved to a different radio network called CBS. He was 39 years old, but instead of getting older on the show, he just froze that number. From then on, he always said he was 39. He said there was nothing funny about turning 40. That year, he introduced the Vault joke, a ridiculous underground fortress filled with traps, security alarms, and even a guard who had supposedly been locked inside since the Civil War. It was absurd and theatrical, and people absolutely loved it. Listeners believed in that vault like it was a real place. By 1936, the regular cast was forming around him. Don Wilson joined with his big booming voice. Phil Harris showed up with his southern charm, calling Jack Jackson and stealing scenes with just a few words. And then came Eddie Anderson, who played a character named Rochester. He was the first black man to have a regular role on national radio. And this was huge because it was the 1930s, when racism was openly accepted in America. Rochester didn't just serve Jack on the show, he outsmarted him. He got the last word. He broke racial barriers every single time he spoke. And when Southern radio stations tried to ban episodes that featured Rochester, Jack refused to do his show without him. That took real courage. From 1937 to 1945, Jack Benny ruled radio. His show was always in the top 3 most popular programs. In 1944, he signed a contract worth $25,000 a week. That's over $400,000 in today's money. He was making about $3 million a year. But the man who joked about being stingy wasn't always cheap in real life. During World War II, he gave away 10% of his radio earnings to help fund the war. He traveled 32,000 miles with the USO, performing for over 3 million soldiers. He didn't just bring jokes. He brought laughter to people who desperately needed something to smile about. The Vault made its official debut on January 7, 1945. The alarm blared, doors creaked open with spooky sounds. Ed the guard stood there waiting. The whole thing played out in people's minds using nothing but sound effects and dialogue. It became more than just a joke. It was a symbol. In 1946, famous actor Ronald Colman appeared on the show and visited the Vault. So did baseball manager Leo Durocher. The Vault became like a clubhouse for the rich and famous. Even though it was completely fictional, fans wrote letters asking Jack to open the Vault and give the money to charity. They believed in it because it represented something bigger. It was about security and saving money and surviving hard times with a sense of humor. But while Jack was making people laugh on the radio, his movie career was struggling badly. In 1929, MGM cast him in a big musical film. The movie made $1 million in profit and was even nominated for Best Picture. But Jack's performance was stiff and wooden and awkward. His violin playing felt forced. His timing didn't work on screen. MGM had just signed him to a 5-year contract, but after his next film bombed at the box office, they quietly dropped him. Within months, he was back on Broadway, completely humiliated. In 1935, he got another chance with a film called Broadway Melody of 1936. This was a big-budget movie with $1 million invested in it. Jack played a rival Broadway producer, and he started making up lines that actually improved the script. But his director hated it. He wanted Jack to say exactly what was written, word for word. They argued so often that crew members remembered shouting matches that lasted for hours. Jack thought comedy timing had to be natural and spontaneous. The director thought he was just being difficult to work with. Even though the film made nearly $3 million and got nominated for Best Picture, Jack walked away with a reputation as someone directors didn't want to hire. That label stuck to him almost as firmly as the one from his first failed film. Then came 1937, and this is where things got really bad. Jack was on vacation in France with Mary when he met a man calling himself Albert Chaparro. This man claimed he was a diplomat from Nicaragua. He offered to smuggle over $2,000 worth of jewelry for Mary through customs using his diplomatic immunity, which meant his bags wouldn't be searched. Jack trusted him completely. He had no idea that the man's real name was Nathan Shapiro and that he was a con artist who had already served time in a federal prison. When Jack arrived back in New York on August 30th, the whole scam fell apart. Shapiro had hidden the jewelry on himself, and his own maid turned him in to authorities after he made anti-Nazi remarks that scared her. Jack found himself standing in front of a judge in 1939. He was fined $10,000 and given a 1-year prison sentence that was suspended, meaning he didn't have to serve it if he stayed out of trouble. The judge told him directly, "You must feel very much ashamed of yourself." And Jack could barely whisper back, "I do." His friend George Burns got caught up in the scandal too. He had bought an expensive diamond bracelet from the same con artist for his wife Gracie to cover burn scars on her arm. Burns was fined $8,000, and legal fees pushed his total cost to almost $18,000. Both men could have seen their careers completely destroyed. But instead, they did something brilliant. They turned it into comedy. They joked about their criminal records and expensive mistakes on their radio shows. Burns even made jokes about having to report to a probation officer. The public loved it. Sponsors didn't drop them. In fact, their popularity went up even higher. Jack kept trying to make movies work. In 1945, he starred in a film called The Horn Blows at Midnight, a fantasy comedy about an angel who was ordered to destroy Earth. Warner Brothers had invested almost $2 million into it. But the timing was absolutely tragic. Just 8 days before the film opened in theaters, President Franklin Roosevelt died. The entire nation was mourning the loss of their president. A comedy about ending the world was the last thing anyone wanted to see. The film made less than $1 million and lost over $800,000. Critics called it overworked and pointless. But Jack didn't hide from the disaster. He made it a running joke for the next 20 years on his radio and TV shows. His self-mocking humor about the film's failure made it more famous than it ever could have been as a successful movie. In 1950, Jack finally tried something new: television. On October 28th, his CBS debut aired with only 4 shows planned for the first season. He still had his radio contract and wasn't sure how he would look at age 56 on a TV screen. He even joked in his first speech on the show about ending his own life if the show failed. But it didn't fail. It absolutely exploded in popularity. By 1952, 20 million people were watching each week. The cigarette company Lucky Strike paid millions in sponsorship money. By 1960, the show went to a weekly schedule, and Jack became one of the biggest names on television. He used that platform to do innovative things. In 1954, future President Ronald Reagan appeared in a vault sketch. It was unusual back then to mix guest stars into a running storyline, but Jack did it anyway. He also welcomed young comedians who were just starting out. On November 20th, 1955, a young Johnny Carson appeared on the show. Jack told him, "Keep improving, and it won't be long before you'll have your picture on TV Guide magazine." Carson never forgot those words of encouragement. He adopted Jack's facial expressions, his timing, and his style of humor. Years later, Johnny Carson became the longest-running late-night talk show host in television history. Jack Benny kept working through the 1960s. His final season on NBC from 1964 to 1965 pushed the Vault sketches even further, turning them into Cold War satire. The Vault had flamethrowers, moats filled with alligators, and even guard plants named Irving. These jokes were layered with commentary about America's obsession with security during the tense relationship with the Soviet Union. Johnny Carson kept visiting the set, and their friendship grew stronger as Jack passed on every technique he had learned over decades. When the show ended on April 16, 1965, it marked the end of something truly historic. After retirement, Jack didn't disappear. He made guest appearances that reflected what was happening in America. In 1965, he hosted a special with Bob Hope and the Beach Boys. He used his Vault jokes to talk about being thrifty during the Vietnam War. CBS paid him top dollar just for one-night shows. Even in his 70s, he was one of the highest-paid comedians in America. But behind all the jokes was something he never talked about publicly. From 1950 to 1964, he promoted Lucky Strike cigarettes on his show. For 15 years, he sold the product that would eventually take his life. In October 1974, he canceled a performance after feeling dizzy and weak. In December, doctors discovered he had pancreatic cancer. It was too advanced to operate on. He had only weeks to live. But he kept filming right up until the very end, refusing to give up. On December 26, 1974, Jack Benny died at age 80. His final visitors included George Burns, Frank Sinatra, Bob Hope, and Johnny Carson. And then something completely unexpected happened. When his will was made public, it revealed a fortune of over $5 million, worth $35 million in today's money. He owned a rare violin from 1729 valued at $46,000. His Beverly Hills mansion sat across the street from the Playboy Mansion and eventually sold for $3 million in 1985. The man everyone thought was cheap had been secretly generous for decades. On October 5, 1961, when his hometown renamed a school after him, he started $39 trust funds for every single baby born in the city that day. He donated quietly to orchestras, youth programs, and charity organizations. His stingy character had been completely fake. The real Jack Benny gave away money without telling anyone. After his death, letters came out showing something else too. He had supported civil rights efforts in secret. He had financially helped Eddie Anderson's family, Rochester, his loyal TV partner. In 1962, Anderson was listed by a magazine as one of the 100 wealthiest African Americans. When Anderson died in 1977, his home became a shelter and rehabilitation center. Their 3 films together between 1940 and 1941 proved that black stars could attract big audiences everywhere, even in the South, even when Hollywood executives said it was impossible. He changed comedy forever. Modern comedians like Jerry Seinfeld and Larry David followed his model of creating a show about nothing, playing a character based on yourself, using running jokes, building an ensemble cast, and mastering awkward pauses. Jack did it all first. His show mixed real life with fiction, broke the fourth wall by talking directly to the audience, and showed how comedy could be subtle, slow, and incredibly clever. Now here's where the story gets really interesting. Remember those audio reels that were locked away, the ones labeled "Do Not Open"? When researchers finally got permission to play them decades after Jack's death, they discovered something fascinating. These weren't embarrassing confessions or dark secrets like some people expected. They were recordings of private performances, experimental jokes, and candid moments where Jack was working through material. Some of the jokes were considered too edgy for the radio during wartime. There were references to the war that couldn't be broadcast. There were behind-the-scenes recordings of arguments with producers and directors. There were moments of vulnerability where Jack talked about his fears of failure and his struggles with movies. But the most shocking discovery wasn't what was in the vault. It was what the vault represented. Jack Benny had created this elaborate fictional vault as a running joke for decades. Millions of Americans laughed at the idea of him being so stingy that he needed a fortress to protect his money. But the real vault, the one that stayed locked after his death, contained proof of who he really was. It contained evidence of his generosity, his struggles, his evolution as a performer, and his private thoughts about race, comedy, and America. The researchers who opened that vault found audio that showed Jack questioning himself constantly. They found recordings where he practiced timing over and over again until it was perfect. They found moments where he broke down crying over failed films. They found conversations where he talked about wanting to do more for civil rights but being afraid of losing his Southern audience. They found the real human being behind the character. And here's what makes this story so powerful. Jack Benny spent his entire career making people laugh by pretending to be cheap and selfish. But in reality, he was generous and kind and deeply troubled by injustice. He created a character that was the opposite of who he really was. The vault on the radio was a joke about greed. The real vault was a time capsule of humanity. Today, in 2025, Jack Benny's old radio scripts are being digitized and released in something called the Radio Vaults podcast series. People are hearing episodes that were lost for decades. His famous January 7th, 1945 episode about the vault is being heard by new generations. And you know what? The timing still works. The jokes still make people laugh. The pauses still create tension. Even though the world has changed completely, Jack Benny's comedy is timeless. When you listen to those old recordings now, knowing what was really in his vault, knowing who he really was, the jokes hit differently. When he makes a joke about being cheap, you know he was actually generous. When he makes a joke about being cowardly, you know he stood up for civil rights when it was dangerous to do so. When he makes a joke about being vain, you know he was deeply insecure about his film failures. Every joke becomes a window into the real person. The vault that researchers opened wasn't just filled with old tapes and documents. It was filled with proof that people are more complex than the characters they play. It was filled with evidence that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is make people laugh while secretly doing good in the world. It was filled with the story of a man who turned failure into success, who turned scandal into comedy, and who turned his own insecurities into an art form that influenced generations of performers. Jack Benny's 3 stars on the Hollywood Walk of Fame, 1 for film, 1 for radio, and 1 for television, mark a career that lasted 63 years. But his real legacy isn't on a sidewalk in Hollywood. It's in every comedian who learned that you don't have to be loud to be funny. It's in every performer who learned that timing matters more than the words themselves. It's in every show that proved you could be subtle and slow and still captivate millions of people. The researchers who opened Jack Benny's vault expected to find scandals or shocking revelations. Instead, they found something much more powerful. They found proof that people are more complex than the characters they play. They found evidence that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is make people laugh while secretly doing good in the world. They found recordings that prove Jack Benny wasn't just a comedian. He was an artist who understood human nature so deeply that his work still resonates almost 100 years later. So, what was really inside Jack Benny's vault? It wasn't gold or jewels or dark secrets. It was something far more valuable. It was the truth about a man who made the world laugh while carrying his own pain. It was the story of someone who failed repeatedly but never gave up. It was proof that you can be remembered for a character you created while still being appreciated for who you really were. And it was a reminder that sometimes the funniest people are the ones who understand sadness most deeply. If you enjoyed learning about Jack Benny's incredible life and the mystery of his vault, please hit that like button right now. Share this video with anyone who loves old Hollywood stories or classic comedy. And make sure to subscribe to this channel because we're diving into more amazing stories about the legends who shaped entertainment history. There are so many more vaults to open, so many more secrets to discover, and so many more incredible lives to explore. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.